They had no idea who they were dealing with. When a flight attendant forced a black family out of first class, it seemed like just another act of bias. But moments later, the truth came out. This family wasn't just wealthy. They owned the entire airline. What happened next changed everything. Before we start the story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The boarding gate buzzed with activity as passengers moved quickly, eager to settle into their seats. Among them was a family of 3, James Anderson, his wife Celeste, and their 5-year-old son Liam. James, dressed in a tailored navy suit, carried a sleek leather briefcase. His demeanor exuded quiet confidence. Celeste, poised and radiant in a flowing ivory dress, held Liam's tiny hand as he skipped beside her, giggling. The family looked forward to their trip, a much-needed break from their hectic lives. As they stepped into the aircraft's first-class cabin, the polished interiors shimmered under the warm cabin lights. James glanced at the seat numbers with a faint smile. "Here we are," he said to Celeste, guiding her and Liam to their seats. Passengers nearby offered brief, polite nods, and the Andersons began settling in. Celeste helped Liam climb into his seat, handing him a small toy airplane that lit up his face with excitement. While James stowed their carry-ons in the overhead compartment, a flight attendant named Veronica Summers observed the family from across the cabin. Veronica's sharp gaze swept over them, her lips pressing into a thin line. She adjusted her crisp uniform as if preparing for action and strode briskly toward their seats. Her forced smile barely concealed the judgment behind her eyes. "Excuse me," Veronica said, her voice carrying an edge of authority as she addressed James. "May I see your boarding passes?" James turned to her calmly and retrieved the passes from his jacket pocket. "Of course," he replied with a polite nod, handing them over. Celeste looked up, sensing a hint of tension in Veronica's tone. Liam, oblivious to the exchange, played happily with his toy. Veronica examined the tickets with a scrutiny that felt unnecessary. Her eyebrows knitted together as she double-checked the details. "First class?" she questioned, her voice faltering slightly as if the words were hard to believe. James nodded once more, maintaining his calm. "Yes, these are our seats," he replied evenly. His tone was measured, but Celeste caught the flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Veronica hesitated, her discomfort palpable. "I'm sorry, but I need to verify something with the front desk. Please remain seated," she said curtly before turning and walking away. Her footsteps were quicker now, her movements tense. As Veronica disappeared behind the curtain, James sat back in his seat, his face unreadable. "What was that about?" Celeste asked softly, her voice laced with concern. James placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Probably a routine check. Don't worry about it," he said, though there was a slight tightening around his mouth that suggested otherwise. In the galley, Veronica was on the phone with a ground staff member, her voice low but urgent. "I have a situation here," she said, glancing back toward the cabin. "There's a family in first class, and I'm not sure their tickets are valid. Could you confirm their booking?" The ground staff member sounded confused. "The Andersons? Their tickets were purchased weeks ago, fully confirmed. Is there an issue?" Veronica paused, struggling to hide her irritation. "No issue," she muttered, ending the call abruptly. But instead of returning to the Andersons with an apology, her expression hardened. She adjusted her posture, taking a deep breath before heading back to the first-class cabin. When she approached their seats again, her voice was firmer. "I'm sorry, but I need you to step aside for a moment. There seems to be an error with your booking." Celeste's brows furrowed as she exchanged a glance with James. Liam looked up from his toy, confused by the sudden tension. James rose to his feet slowly, his calm exterior masking the frustration brewing beneath. "What kind of error?" he asked, his voice steady. "I need to confirm your seating," Veronica said, avoiding his gaze. She gestured toward the galley. "If you'd follow me, please." James hesitated but nodded, signaling Celeste to stay seated with Liam. As he followed Veronica, Whispers began to ripple through the cabin. Passengers exchanged curious glances, sensing something unusual was unfolding. Celeste watched them go, her unease growing. Liam tugged at her sleeve, sensing the change in atmosphere. "Mommy, what's happening?" he asked softly. She smiled at him, though her grip on his hand tightened slightly. "Nothing, sweetheart," she said gently. "Daddy's just sorting something out." But in her heart, she knew this was far from routine. Something wasn't right, and her instincts told her the situation was about to escalate. In the galley, James stood calmly, his presence unshaken as Veronica fumbled with her words. "Sir," she began, her voice tinged with an unusual mix of hesitation and authority. "We're trying to clarify a seating issue. It appears that your reservation might have been flagged." James raised an eyebrow, his tone sharp yet controlled. "Flagged? I booked these tickets weeks ago, fully paid and confirmed. What exactly is the issue?" Veronica crossed her arms, a defensive stance creeping into her posture. "It's not about payment. It's just that first class is a premium cabin, and we have to ensure all seating is accurate." James stared at her for a moment, processing the implication. His lips curved slightly, not in amusement but in disbelief. "Premium cabin?" he repeated. "Are you suggesting that I don't belong here?" Veronica stiffened, suddenly aware of how her words might have sounded. "Of course not," she replied quickly, her tone sharp as if to mask her discomfort. "I just need to follow protocol." James took a deep breath, his calm exterior betraying a flicker of irritation. "Very well," he said, his voice steady. "Let's resolve this quickly. My family is waiting." Meanwhile, back in the cabin, passengers whispered among themselves. Celeste felt the weight of their stares but kept her focus on Liam, who was now fidgeting with his toy. A middle-aged man seated across the aisle leaned toward her, his expression sympathetic. "Is everything okay?" he asked in a low voice. Celeste offered him a tight smile. "It's just a mix-up," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. The man nodded but cast a glance toward the galley, where James and Veronica had disappeared, sensing that there was more to the situation than met the eye. As James stood waiting, Veronica stepped away to speak with another flight attendant, a younger woman named Grace. Grace's brow furrowed as she listened, glancing toward James briefly. "Did you check the reservation system?" Grace asked, her tone cautious. Veronica frowned. "Yes, but it's not just about the ticket." "Look at him," she whispered, gesturing subtly in James's direction. "Does he seem like the usual first-class passenger?" Grace's eyes widened slightly in surprise. "You can't make those kinds of judgments," she replied firmly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If his ticket is valid, that's the end of it." Veronica huffed, brushing past Grace to return to James. "Sir," she said, her tone clipped, "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you and your family to move to the main cabin until this is sorted out." James tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "On what grounds?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight that made Veronica hesitate. "Like I said, it's protocol," she replied stiffly, avoiding his gaze. James's patience wore thin, his voice lowered, carrying a firmness that made Veronica flinch. "If you're suggesting we leave first class, I expect a clear and valid reason. Because at this moment, it seems like you're acting on something other than protocol." Veronica opened her mouth to respond but was interrupted by a sudden chime over the intercom. The captain's voice filled the cabin, calm yet commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we finalize some adjustments. We'll ensure your comfort for the remainder of the flight." The announcement barely registered with Veronica, who felt her composure slipping. James gave her a long, pointed look before pulling out his phone. "Excuse me," he said curtly, turning away as he made a call. His tone was measured, but there was no mistaking the authority behind his words. "Is this still the right time?" he asked into the phone. After a brief pause, he added, "Good. Proceed as planned." He ended the call swiftly and returned his attention to Veronica, his calmness now unsettling. "Shall we return to my family?" James asked, his tone polite but firm. Veronica hesitated, her confidence shaken. She nodded stiffly and led the way back to the cabin, but something about James's composure made her stomach churn. As they approached the first-class section, all eyes turned toward them. James's return was met with murmurs, passengers clearly sensing the tension in the air. Celeste stood, her gaze meeting James's in silent question. He gave her a reassuring nod, but there was a subtle shift in his expression that only she noticed, a look that told her the situation was far from over. Veronica remained uneasy as she escorted James back to his seat. Her mind raced, but she maintained her professional facade. Celeste greeted James with a quiet, questioning look, but he gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Liam, sensing his father's return, beamed and resumed playing with his toy airplane, oblivious to the tension simmering around him. Before James could fully settle in, Veronica returned, her face set in determination. "Sir," she began, her voice clipped, "we've decided that it would be best for you and your family to move to the main cabin until we can fully verify your reservation." Celeste's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure, glancing at James to gauge his reaction. James took a slow, deliberate breath and looked directly at Veronica, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Our tickets have been verified. We paid for these seats in full. If there's a valid reason for us to move, I'd like to hear it now." Veronica hesitated, her confidence faltering under James's unyielding gaze. Other passengers began to take notice, their murmurs growing louder. An elderly woman a few rows away whispered to her companion, "They've been perfectly polite. What's the issue?" A younger man seated nearby interjected loudly enough for others to hear, "They're paying customers like the rest of us. Why are they being singled out?" The rising voices seemed to rattle Veronica further. "Sir, I don't want to escalate this," she said, her tone sharpening. "Please cooperate, or I'll be forced to involve security." Celeste's eyes narrowed, her patience clearly wearing thin. Before she could speak, James raised a hand gently, signaling for her to stay calm. He stood slowly, adjusting his suit jacket with deliberate precision. "If you're calling security," he said evenly, "make sure they come prepared with an explanation." The challenge in his tone sent a ripple through the cabin. Veronica's face reddened slightly, but she held her ground. "Please gather your belongings," she insisted, her voice now betraying a hint of desperation. James locked eyes with her for a long moment before turning to Celeste. "It's fine," he said softly, his calm demeanor as steady as ever. "Let's go." Passengers watched in silence as James, Celeste, and Liam stood to collect their things. Liam clung to his toy airplane, his earlier excitement now dimmed by confusion. Celeste kept her head high, her expression unreadable as she held Liam's hand. James led the way toward the main cabin, his steps measured and deliberate, even as the weight of countless eyes bore down on them. As they walked, James reached into his pocket and sent a quick message on his phone, his face betraying nothing. They were directed to cramped seats in the middle row of the main cabin. James helped Celeste settle Liam into his new seat before sitting beside them. The contrast between the space and luxury of first class and the tight confines of the main cabin was stark, but neither James nor Celeste showed any outward reaction. Meanwhile, Veronica returned to the galley, her nerves fraying as she overheard the murmurs from first-class passengers. "That wasn't right," one man muttered. "They had tickets. Why treat them like that?" Another added, "This is going to backfire." Veronica ignored the comments, but her discomfort grew. As she reached the galley phone, it buzzed, startling her. She picked it up hesitantly, her voice shaky. "This is Veronica," she said. The captain's voice came through, firm and no nonsense. "Miss Summers, I just received a call from the airline's executive team. They've been contacted directly by a passenger on this flight. I need to know exactly what's going on." Veronica's stomach dropped. She stumbled over her words, her confidence evaporating. It was just a routine issue," she stammered. "I thought there might have been a mistake with their tickets." There was a long pause on the other end, and when the captain spoke again, his tone carried a warning. "You need to handle this carefully. We cannot afford a situation like this.